another quadratic. This quadratic is a difference of two squares. And if you remember the pattern, it's very easy to factor. But if you don't remember the pattern, then you can still use this X factor method. So first we're going to ask ourselves, is there anything in common that we can factor out? And the answer is no. But then we have to stop and think. Remember in our previous problems, I'll put that up, that we had a trinomial. We had 3 terms. And we looked at our middle term and we put it here in the bottom. Well, in the problem that we're doing here, we don't have an x term, do we? It's actually 0. So I'm just going to show you what I mean. This is the same as 4x squared plus 0x minus 25 equals 0. 0 times x is 0. So when you don't see an x term, you can automatically say that my middle term is 0. So this is my first and my last term. So just like we've done previously, I'm going to take my first term and multiply it to my last term. So that gives me negative 100. Remember, we have to include the sign. Well, what are the factors of negative 100 when you add them together give you 0? Well, 10 times 10 is 100, but one of them has to be negative since 100 is a negative. So 10 times negative 10 is negative 100. 10 plus negative 10 is 0. So just like we've done before, we're going to copy down our first term. And our middle term becomes this, plus 10x minus 10x. And I know it's an x because I have an x here in my equation. And then I have minus 25 equals 0. Now that I have 4 terms, I can factor by grouping, split this into 2 groups. So I'm going to look at what do these two have in common. Well, I can factor out 2x. So if I factor out 2x, remember I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to divide this by 2x, and I'm going to divide this term by 2x. So then that means then 4x squared divided by 2x gives me 2x. 10x divided by 2x gives me 5. Then I look at my second group. Notice this coefficient is negative. So chances are I'm going to want to factor out a negative. And it looks like I'm going to have to factor out a 5. That's what the two have in common. So I'm going to actually factor out negative 5. And then that's going to leave me with 2x plus 5. And that whole thing equals 0. Okay, so now you can see I have common binomial factors that I can factor out. So I'm going to take out that factor, 2x plus 5, and then I'm left with 2x minus 5, and all of that equals 0. Okay. So in order to solve for 0, I have to do the following. I have to set this to 0. I also have to set this to 0, and I have to solve for x. Well, let's see. see here. I have 2x plus 5 equals 0. So if I subtract 5 from both sides, I end up with 2x equals negative 5. Then I have to divide both sides by 2, and I get x equals negative 5 halves. That's one answer. The other one is 2x minus 5 equals 0. I add 5 to both sides, so that gives me 2x equals positive 5. Divide both sides by 2, so I get x is equal to 5 halves. Now there was an easier way to do this, and I'm going to look over on the right side of my paper. I'm going to take the same equation, 4x squared minus 25 equals 0. When it's equal to 0, what I'm looking for is a value of x that makes this equation true. So I could have done this to solve this problem. So I get x squared is equal to 25 divided by 4. So how do I undo an x squared? I take the square root of both sides. So the square root of x squared is x, and that's the same as the square root of 25 divided by the square root of 4. So x is the square root of 25, which is 5, divided by the square root of 4, which is 2. So notice I got the same answer. Oops, I forgot one thing. We have to make sure we always take the plus or minus, because remember we had two answers. So now my answer, this means that x could be, x is 5 halves, or x is negative 5 halves. That's what the plus or minus means right there. So if you notice, we got the same answer, just going about this in a slightly different way.